Hello, welcome back to our channel, where we explore the deepest and most terrifying mysteries of the world. Today, we have content that will chill even the bravest souls. We're diving into real and supernatural stories filled with mysteries about the world of Freemasonry. These are accounts of sinister shadows, malevolent presences, secret rituals, and spirits that dwell there, along with paranormal encounters that defy all logical explanations. Prepare to hear tales that will stir your mind and heart. From visions of spectral figures to frightening premonitions, these episodes will leave you questioning everything you think you know about life, death, and the world of Freemasonry. Stories that will make you ponder what exists on the other side. Watch and draw your own conclusions. Warning: these stories are real and reported by a Freemason, which may disturb sensitive minds, submitted by viewers. If you have a story to tell, send it to us down below. Story 1. Jack, a man marked by a life of sacrifices and struggles, was born and grew up in a humble neighborhood where opportunities were scarce and destiny seemed predetermined. At 14, he saw his father taken by a tragic accident, leaving his mother alone to care for 3 small children. With no other choice, Jack quit school and plunged into the world of work to support his family. He started as a bricklayer's helper, carrying bricks and mixing cement under the scorching sun. His still-forming body quickly hardened, reflecting the harshness of his reality. Over time, Jack became a master builder, known for his relentless work ethic and ability to turn simple projects into true works of art. However, the lack of formal education was always a burden he carried, a weight that some architects and engineers made a point to remind him of, underestimating his abilities. But Jack, with his accumulated experience, managed to earn respect and recognition in the construction community, where he became sought after to lead challenging projects. It was during one of these projects that Jack attracted the attention of a dark and enigmatic figure, a man associated with Freemasonry, the secret society that for centuries has been shrouded in mystery, power, and controversy. Freemasonry, with its origins tied to the stonemasons and architects of the past, is known for its secret rituals, enigmatic symbols, and a network of influence that stretches across the globe. Its members, known as Freemasons, share secrets that date back to antiquity, guided by principles of brotherhood, wisdom, and, according to some, a relentless pursuit of power. Freemasonry has always sparked fascination and fear, and Jack knew little about it, except for some rumors that circulated among the workers. They said that Freemasons controlled destinies, that they had access to hidden knowledge, and that their rituals involved more than simple initiation ceremonies. However, Jack never imagined that his life would cross paths with this mysterious group. One day, while working on the completion of a housing complex, a man with a commanding presence arrived in a dark-windowed pickup truck. His presence immediately demanded respect, as if he were someone accustomed to controlling any environment he entered. He introduced himself as Richard, no last name, but what really caught Jack's attention was the symbol tattooed near the man's thumb, the famous eye within a triangle, the emblem of Freemasonry. Richard was not an ordinary client. He was not interested in the technical details of the construction or in discussing deadlines. His proposal was clear and direct: a well-paid job in another state, with a guarantee to resolve any contracts Jack had already signed. The offer was tempting, especially for someone like Jack, who carried the financial responsibilities of his family as a constant burden. But what truly intrigued him was the involvement of Freemasonry and why they had chosen him. Not knowing what to expect, Jack accepted the offer. The next day, an envelope was left under the door of his home, containing a key and an address. He knew he was about to enter something much larger than he could comprehend. He gathered his best workers, John, Oscar, Mike, Louis, and Tony, and headed to the indicated location, a secluded and luxurious mansion, surrounded by a mystery that seemed palpable. The mansion, resembling a castle, had imposing architecture, but it was what lay within its walls that really mattered. Upon their arrival, Jack was led to an office decorated with symbols he recognized as belonging to Freemasonry. The walls were adorned with mounted animal heads, a decoration that seemed to symbolize some kind of power over life and death. Richard explained that the work would be arduous, but that the reward would be worth it. He also made it clear that Jack should not ask questions about the real purpose of the construction. In the days that followed, Jack and his men began to work, but soon realized that something was wrong. The construction, which was supposed to be the foundation of a new building, made no sense. The walls were being erected without apparent logic, as if they were meant to hide something or someone. The workers began to report whispering voices, and Jack, although skeptical at first, soon found himself involved in a mystery that challenged his understanding. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of work, Jack found an old coin on the ground, with the initials JL engraved on it. Upon touching it, he felt a chill run down his spine, and at that moment, he clearly heard a voice calling for help, as if it were trapped inside the concrete walls. The sound was muffled, as if someone were being suffocated by the weight of the cement. In the days that followed, things only got worse. John, one of the workers, mysteriously disappeared. When searching for him, Jack found only his jacket thrown next to a pile of stones. But it was during the night that the real horror revealed itself. Jack, driven by a sense of urgency, went to the construction site and, hidden among the bushes, witnessed a scene he would never forget. Richard, along with other men dressed in dark robes, was performing a macabre ritual. The bodies of his missing colleagues were being placed inside the walls of the construction, fitted into long, thin wooden boxes, which were then covered with fresh cement. It was a sacrifice, an offering to the Lord of Darkness, as part of a ritual that promised wealth and power in exchange for human lives. Jack wanted to scream, to run to save his friends, but the young man who had appeared before, the one with sad eyes, held him back and pleaded for him to stay quiet. The young man revealed that he himself had been a victim of Freemasonry, sacrificed in a similar ritual, and that his soul had been trapped there until Jack found his coin. The young man insisted that Jack should flee before he too was sacrificed. When the ritual ended, Jack ran to the walls where his friends had been buried, desperately trying to break the concrete. But the cement had already dried, and he knew it was too late. The walls, now sealed, imprisoned the souls of his friends, whose laments echoed through the castle, calling for help that would never come. Jack was found the next morning, unconscious, in his pickup truck after an accident on the road. He was taken to the hospital, where he tried to explain to the authorities what had happened. However, when they returned to the site, the mansion was abandoned, as if no one had been there for years. There was no sign of his friends, and the authorities concluded that Jack was delirious from the trauma of the accident. But Jack knew the truth. He knew that Freemasonry, with its dark rituals and ancient secrets, had claimed the lives of his friends. Their souls were trapped forever in the concrete walls, their voices whispering in the darkness, in a construction that was now just a haunted ruin. The guilt and terror haunted Jack for the rest of his life, a man who had survived an encounter with the forces that govern the occult, but who had lost everything in the process. Story 2. It was a chilly autumn night in a small town in Illinois when Thomas Walker, an ordinary man marked by hardships, received a visit that would forever change his fate. Thomas was a simple 38-year-old man, married to Susan, with whom he had 2 small children. He worked as a manager at a small hardware store, barely managing to cover the family's expenses. Debts were piling up and the future looked bleak. His marriage was in crisis, and the pressure to support his family was becoming unbearably heavy on his shoulders. Thomas had always been a hard-working man, but fate never seemed to smile at him. The store where he worked was on the verge of bankruptcy, and his mortgaged home was about to be taken by the bank. Amid this storm, a mysterious man with a distinctive appearance, dressed in a flawless suit, introduced himself as William Mason. William, who appeared to be in his 50s, had an air of sophistication that immediately intimidated Thomas. He seemed to know everything about Thomas's life, from his financial difficulties to his personal troubles. William offered Thomas something he could never have imagined, the chance to change his life forever. "I can help you, Thomas," said William in a calm, controlled tone. "I can ensure that all your debts disappear, that you will achieve financial success beyond your wildest dreams. All you need to do is trust me and join our fraternity." Initially skeptical, Thomas was intrigued by the proposal. But at the same time, a chill ran down his spine. Something about William's gaze was disturbing, as if he were offering a pact with forces beyond human comprehension. Still, desperation spoke louder, and Thomas accepted the invitation to learn more about this fraternity. William took Thomas to a secluded location on the outskirts of town, an ancient and imposing mansion, surrounded by dense trees that blocked the moonlight. The mansion had a dark aura, with its dark windows and a facade that seemed to be in constant vigilance. Inside, Thomas was greeted by other men, all dressed in formal attire, with looks that conveyed power and unrevealed secrets. They led him to a room adorned with esoteric symbols and candles casting unsettling shadows on the walls. In the center of the room, there was a large stone altar, covered with a deep red cloth, where the emblem of Freemasonry, the square and compass intertwined with the all-seeing eye, was engraved. William explained that to be accepted into the fraternity, Thomas would have to undergo a series of rituals, tests that would not only prove his loyalty but also prepare him for the power he would receive. He warned that these rituals were not for the faint of heart, as they involved confronting one's greatest fears and sacrificing something deeply personal. The first ritual was the path of initiation, where Thomas was blindfolded and led down a long, dark corridor. He could hear whispers around him, voices that seemed to emanate from the walls, murmuring incomprehensible words. At one point, he was instructed to stop and place his hand in a metal urn. Upon doing so, he felt something viscous and warm blood. He was told it was the blood of those who had come before him, who had sacrificed their lives for the cause of the fraternity. Next, he was led to a room where a circle of men, all members of Freemasonry, awaited. In the center of the circle was a small wooden box. William explained that inside the box was an object that represented Thomas's greatest fear. "You must confront this, Thomas, without hesitation if you wish to move forward." When he opened the box, Thomas found a small porcelain doll, something he had associated with a childhood trauma. The doll, with its empty black eyes, seemed alive, and when he touched it, he heard a horrific scream echo through the room. Although his instinct was to flee, Thomas stood firm, holding the doll until the scream ceased and silence filled the room. This was just the beginning. The following rituals involved even more disturbing challenges, from walking through labyrinths where shadows seemed to follow him to a test where he had to drink from a chalice that, according to the Masons, contained the essence of death. Each ritual broke a little more of his sanity but also brought him closer to the secrets that the fraternity guarded. Finally, after weeks of trials, Thomas was declared fit to join Freemasonry. William congratulated him, and as promised, his life began to change drastically. His debts were mysteriously paid off, his hardware store was revitalized with significant investment, and soon he became the owner of several other stores in the area. Thomas's fortune grew exponentially, and he and his family moved to a mansion, where all the luxuries he had only dreamed of before became reality. But as with everything in life, there was a price to be paid. Thomas began to notice that his new wealth and success came with a dark burden. He started having recurring nightmares, visions of the Masonic ceremonies, but now with more grotesque details. In the dreams, he saw the faces of the men who had initiated him, but their eyes were empty, as if their souls had been devoured by something evil. He also began to feel a presence in his house, something he could not see, but that was always there, watching him. The members of Freemasonry continued to seek him out for new rituals, and with each one, Thomas felt more disconnected from reality. He began to notice that his wife and children were also changing. Susan became more distant, the children began exhibiting strange behaviors, talking to imaginary friends who, according to them, lived in the walls of the house. One night, Thomas was summoned for a final ritual, something that, according to William, would elevate him to the highest degree of the fraternity. He was taken back to the mansion where it all began, but this time, the atmosphere was even heavier. The corridors were dark, and the air was dense and suffocating. Thomas was led to the room with the altar, now transformed into something much more macabre. On the altar were three objects: a dagger, a rope, and a leather mask. William explained that to complete his ascension, Thomas would have to perform a final sacrifice, something that had not been mentioned before. He had to choose between sacrificing his family, his sanity, or his own life. The psychological terror Thomas felt at that moment was indescribable. He knew that somehow there was no escape. If he did not complete the ritual, he would lose everything he had gained and, even worse, his family would be cursed forever. But if he went ahead, he would have to choose between losing something he deeply loved. Desperate, Thomas tried to argue, but William and the other members just watched in silence, their expressions impassive. Time seemed to race, and the walls of the room began to close in on him. Finally, unable to withstand the pressure, Thomas chose to sacrifice his sanity. He picked up the leather mask and placed it over his face. Doing so, he felt intense pain, as if his mind was being torn apart. He was flooded with terrifying visions, dismembered bodies, faces of people who had been sacrificed before him, all of them screaming in agony. His reality disintegrated, and when the mask was finally removed, Thomas was no longer the same. His eyes were empty, lifeless, and he could no longer distinguish the real from the imaginary. The members of Freemasonry, satisfied, left him in the mansion, where he was found days later, mumbling incoherencies, completely insane. His fortune, which had once seemed like his salvation, had become a prison. Susan, unable to cope with the situation, took the children and left him alone. The house, once a symbol of his success, became a living tomb, where Thomas spent the rest of his days, haunted by the visions of the rituals and the screams of the condemned. The tragic end of Thomas Walker became a legend in the small town, a grim reminder that sometimes, the price of success can be higher than one is willing to pay. And for those who still dare to delve into the secrets of Freemasonry, his story serves as a warning. Once inside, you can never leave, and what you sacrifice may be something you can never recover. Thomas Walker's days turned into a spiral of madness and despair. After losing his sanity in that final ritual, he was trapped in an existence that was a cruel parody of what could have been a prosperous life. The material success he had achieved became a burden, as he could no longer enjoy anything that money bought. The house, once imposing and luxurious, now was a dark labyrinth, where shadows and whispers tormented him at every step. Isolated from the world, Thomas lived as a recluse. The nights were filled with nightmares so vivid he no longer knew if he was awake or dreaming. In every corner of the house, he saw the faces of the men who had initiated him into Freemasonry, their empty eyes watching him, judging his choices. But the worst were the whispers, voices echoing in the walls, calling for him, asking him to complete some obscure ritual he could no longer remember. The few who dared approach the mansion, curious neighbors, former acquaintances, even some members of Freemasonry who came to check on his condition, reported an oppressive feeling, as if an evil presence loomed over the place. The garden, once well kept, now was overtaken by weeds and twisted trees, which seemed to reflect Thomas's deteriorated state. The mansion, which should have symbolized his rise, was crumbling, eroded by forces no one could explain. Susan, who had left Thomas with the children, never saw him again. She tried to rebuild her life in another city, but was haunted by what she had left behind. The children, who previously spoke with imaginary friends, began having recurring nightmares, screaming in the middle of the night about the man with the mask who came for them. Susan sought help, but no one could alleviate the guilt she felt for abandoning her husband. Meanwhile, Thomas began to believe that he could still escape his fate. In one of his moments of lucidity, he remembered a legend he had heard during the rituals, the story of an ancient Freemason who managed to break his pact, freeing himself from the clutches of the fraternity. This legend filled him with desperate hope, and he began to search for clues within the mansion, poring over old books, rummaging through forgotten chests, in search of some fragment of truth. One night, while rummaging through the attic, Thomas found an old book, bound in leather, with pages yellowed by time. The title, engraved in golden letters, was The Secrets of the Grand Architect. Flipping through the book, Thomas found descriptions of dark rituals, made to invoke and control forces beyond human comprehension. But what most interested him was a section that talked about soul liberation, a complex ritual that could, in theory, reverse the effects of a pact made with Freemasonry. Thomas, although already on the brink of madness, decided he would try. He gathered the ingredients mentioned in the book: black candles, arcane symbols drawn with blood, and a silver coin he found hidden in one of the rooms. The ritual required him to invoke the forces that had him so, and then confront them with his will to be freed. On the night of the new moon, Thomas initiated the ritual in the basement of the mansion, a place he had always avoided, knowing it was there that the darkest Masonic rituals were performed. The environment was stifling, the shadows seemed to move on their own, and the air was charged with a malevolent energy. He drew the symbols on the floor, lit the candles, and began chanting the words described in the book. As the ritual progressed, Thomas felt a presence materializing in the basement. The candles flickered, and a dark mist began to form in the center of the circle he had drawn. The mist took shape, transforming into a hooded figure, its eyes glowing like red-hot coals. The figure slowly approached, and Thomas felt an overwhelming pressure on his mind, as if all his fears and regrets were being amplified to an unbearable level. "Do you dare challenge me?" the voice echoed, reverberating through the basement walls. It was a deep, ancient voice, laden with a malevolence Thomas had never experienced. "You made a pact, and there is no turning back." Thomas, trembling with fear, tried to maintain his composure. He recited the final words of the ritual, offering the silver coin as a symbol of his will to be freed. But as he did so, he realized something terrible. The ritual required a final sacrifice, something he had not fully understood. The silver coin began to glow, and the hooded figure laughed, a laugh that echoed through Thomas's mind, tearing the last remnants of his sanity. "You offered your soul, Thomas Walker," said the figure, reaching out towards the coin. And now it is mine." Thomas felt his vision darken and his mind shatter. He fell to his knees, unable to fight the force that pulled him into the darkness. The last thing he saw before losing consciousness was the hooded figure dissipating into the mist, taking with it the essence of his soul. When morning came, Thomas was found by William, the man who had started it all, lying in the mansion's basement. He was catatonic, murmuring nonsensical words, completely devoid of any trace of humanity. Freemasonry had fulfilled its promise, but the price was too high. The mansion was sold, and Thomas was admitted to a sanatorium, where he spent the rest of his days in silence, haunted by the visions of what he had done. The legend of Thomas Walker spread, becoming another dark chapter in the annals of Freemasonry, a reminder that power and wealth always come with a cost, and that some pacts can never be broken. Thus, the legacy of Thomas Walker became a warning to all those who dared to approach the shadows, a tale of psychological terror that revealed the true price of unbridled ambition and the desire to escape mediocrity at any cost. Story 3. The story of David Harrison, an ordinary man who became extraordinary, is a tale wrapped in mystery, tragedy, and suspense. Born to a modest family in the suburbs of Boston, David always stood out for his intelligence and ambition. From a young age, he believed that success was the only way out of the difficulties his family faced. Thus, after years of hard work, he graduated with a degree in business administration and quickly climbed the career ladder, securing a prestigious position at one of the city's largest financial corporations. However, despite all his effort, David felt something was still missing. He craved more power, more control, more respect. It was during this period of dissatisfaction that he met Gregory, an enigmatic and influential man, who introduced him to a different path, a gateway to a world of opportunities known to few, Freemasonry. Gregory, with his captivating smile and air of mystery, explained that Freemasonry was more than just a secret society. It was a fraternity that had shaped the fate of the powerful over the centuries, guarding secrets that those outside the circle could not comprehend. "David," Gregory said, "we can offer you what you seek, unlimited success, power beyond what you can imagine. But, like everything in life, it comes at a price." The promise was too tempting to refuse, and so, David was initiated into the fraternity. The initial rituals, though strange and somewhat uncomfortable, were conducted with a mix of reverence and fear. He was taken to hidden places, subjected to trials that tested his courage and determination. In a secret ceremony, held in an underground chamber lit only by torches, he swore allegiance to Freemasonry, committing never to reveal the secrets he was about to learn. Following his initiation, David's life took a dramatic turn. He quickly rose through the ranks of his company, receiving unexpected promotions and lucrative investment offers. His financial life flourished, and he and his wife, Emily, bought a luxurious house in an exclusive neighborhood. Their 2 children, Matthew and Sophie, were enrolled in the best schools, and life seemed perfect. Party nights and gatherings with other members of Freemasonry became routine, and David began to feel invincible, as if he had reached a level of power few ever experience. However, over time, David began to question what he had sacrificed to achieve this success. The rituals of Freemasonry became darker and more disturbing. He was asked to participate in ceremonies involving archaic symbols and practices that made him uncomfortable. One night, during a ritual involving the symbolic sacrifice of a lamb, David saw something in the eyes of the other members that made him question his involvement, a cruelty and emptiness he could not comprehend. The breaking point came when Freemasonry demanded something he was unwilling to give. During a secret meeting, Gregory and other senior members revealed to David that he needed to undergo a loyalty sacrifice to advance to the next level. The sacrifice involved something personal and painful, something that would test his devotion to the fraternity. It was at this moment that David realized he had gone too far. He could no longer ignore the signs that he was involved in something far more sinister than he had imagined. David refused the request, stating that he was not willing to sacrifice his integrity, or worse, his family, for a power that now seemed empty and corrupted. Gregory warned him with a cold look. No one leaves Freemasonry, David. You're already committed and there's no turning back. Remember what you swore. Despite the warnings, David began to distance himself from the fraternity. He stopped attending meetings and avoided contact with members, hoping he could resume a normal life. But things quickly began to unravel. His life, once so perfect, started to transform into a nightmare. First came Matthew, his older son. Matthew, a bright and promising teenager, began showing signs of severe depression. He became withdrawn, spent hours locked in his room, and avoided any social interaction. David tried to help, taking him to therapists and doctors, but nothing seemed to work. Then, one winter night, David's nightmare became reality. Matthew was found dead in his room, hanged with a rope. The police ruled it a suicide, but David knew there was more. He remembered Gregory's warnings and couldn't shake the feeling that his son's death was connected to his refusal to continue with the rituals. Matthew's death devastated the family. Emily fell into a deep depression, and Sophie, still too young to understand the tragedy, began having constant nightmares, waking up in the middle of the night screaming her brother's name. David, consumed by guilt and grief, began to realize that Freemasonry would not let him escape unscathed. He felt that he was being watched, that the fraternity was waiting for the right moment to strike again. A few weeks after Matthew's death, tragedy struck again. Emily went out shopping and never returned. Hours later, the police knocked on David's door with terrible news. Emily's car had veered off the road on a dangerous curve and fallen into a ravine. The vehicle exploded on impact and her body was found charred. Although the authorities classified the incident as an accident, David knew it was not a mere coincidence. Something or someone was orchestrating his destruction. Now, with his wife dead and his daughter traumatized, David decided he could no longer continue. He wanted to flee, to leave everything behind, but he knew Freemasonry would follow him wherever he went. Desperate, he sought out Gregory one last time, pleading to be released from the oaths he had taken. Gregory, however, just smiled coldly and told him that the only way out was through death. Strange things began to happen in David's house. Sophie, who previously had nightmares, now began to talk to someone invisible, claiming her brother and mother came to visit her at night. Lights flickered, objects moved on their own, and the house was immersed in a constant feeling of fear and despair. David began to feel that he was going mad, that Freemasonry was trying to destroy what remained of his mind. One dark night, the situation reached its peak. David woke up in the middle of the night with a sense of absolute dread. He went to Sophie's room and found her sleeping peacefully, but when he looked in the mirror, he saw something that froze him with fear. Behind him, in the reflection, were Matthew and Emily, their expressions grim and lifeless, watching him with an accusing gaze. David ran out of the room, trying to escape the visions that haunted him. The next morning, David's body was found hanging in the attic of the house. The police declared the case a suicide, but the few friends who remained knew the truth was much more complex and sinister. David had fought against forces beyond comprehension, and in the end, those forces had prevailed. After his death, David's house was abandoned, left to rot. Neighbors spoke in whispers about the events that had occurred there, and no one dared to approach the place, now considered cursed. Those who attempted to investigate the circumstances of his death encountered only closed doors and evasive answers. Freemasonry, with its ancient secrets and dark rituals, had ensured that David Harrison's story would become another dark legend, buried in silence and darkness. But those who knew David knew that his death was not a simple suicide. It was the result of a desperate struggle against a power he could not control, a power that took everything he loved and left him with nothing but despair and tragedy. Freemasonry, with its veil of mystery and promises of greatness, had shown its true face, a face of darkness, sacrifices, and terror. And thus, the story of David Harrison became a warning, a reminder that some doors, once opened, can never be closed. David Harrison's house remained abandoned for years, gaining a reputation for being haunted. The residents of the small town of Boston avoided passing by, and those who dared to tell stories spoke of inexplicable lights and mysterious sounds coming from within. Many believed that David's soul was still trapped in the house, along with those of his wife and son, condemned to wander the corridors in search of peace. But there was one person who could not simply forget what had happened: Robert, David's best friend since childhood. Robert was a successful lawyer and had always been a skeptic, someone who believed more in facts than in supernatural stories. However, the death of David, along with the tragedy that befell his family, never made sense to him. He knew that David would never have taken his own life, not after everything he had fought for. Something else was at play, something he needed to understand. Driven by guilt for not having been more present in David's life in recent years and by the need to uncover the truth, Robert began to investigate Freemasonry and the events leading to his friend's death. He scoured police records, interviewed former neighbors, and even tried to speak with the few members of Freemasonry he knew had been close to David. But whenever he asked, he was met with silence or evasive answers, as if everyone was under an oath of secrecy they could not break. Robert's frustration grew. He knew he was approaching something dangerous, but he was determined to move forward. His first major breakthrough came when he found a diary hidden in David's office, which had been left behind in the abandoned house. The diary was filled with disturbing entries, David's reflections on the Masonic rituals, his growing feelings of dread, and his decision to try to leave the fraternity. Among the pages of the diary, Robert found something even more unsettling: a letter that David had written but never sent. The letter was addressed to Robert and detailed the dark rituals he had witnessed, his suspicions that Freemasonry was behind the deaths of his wife and son, and the growing fear that he himself was next. David mentioned that he was being followed, that he heard voices and saw shadows that seemed alive, and that he knew his time was running out. Robert, if you're reading this, the last line of the letter said, know that they will try to silence you too. The truth is too dangerous to be revealed. Reading that letter deeply moved Robert. Now he had certainty that something terrible had happened, something that Freemasonry wanted to keep hidden at any cost. So, he decided that he would uncover what really happened, even if it put his own life at risk. Robert began to receive veiled threats, anonymous phone calls, letters without a sender, and a constant feeling of being watched. He knew he was stirring up a hornet's nest, but the idea of giving up never crossed his mind. He managed to track down a former member of Freemasonry, a man named Henry, who had left the fraternity years earlier after a nervous breakdown. Henry, initially reluctant to talk, eventually confessed to Robert the horrors he had witnessed. He confirmed that the rituals David mentioned were real, and that the higher members of Freemasonry participated in dark ceremonies involving sacrifices and invocations of forces that Henry preferred not to describe in detail. He also stated that those who tried to leave the fraternity, or worse, expose its secrets, were removed in a way that seemed natural: suicides, accidents, sudden illnesses. But there was more. Henry revealed that David's house was a place of power for Freemasonry, a site where ancient rituals had been performed long before David even thought of moving there. The land itself was marked, and those who lived there inevitably became targets of forces that Henry couldn't explain. He pleaded with Robert to give up his investigation, saying that the same powers that destroyed David were now focused on him. Despite the warnings, Robert couldn't turn back. He started spending more time at David's house, searching every corner for clues. The nights he spent there were terrifying. He began to hear the same whispers that David had mentioned in his diary, felt the invisible presence that seemed to watch him every moment, and saw shadows move on the walls, even when he was completely sober. During one of these nights, Robert discovered a secret room in the basement, hidden behind a false wall. The room was filled with items he recognized from the Masonic rituals described by David: black candles, arcane symbols, and a large stone altar. But what really froze him with fear was a set of old, yellowed photographs spread out on the altar. The photos showed rituals performed decades before, with hooded figures he immediately recognized. One of them was Gregory, the man who had introduced David to Freemasonry. Robert knew he was in great danger. He took the photos and left the house, determined to expose the truth. But, like David, he began to realize that escaping Freemasonry wouldn't be that simple. That same night, he suffered a car accident very similar to Emily's. His vehicle skidded on a deserted road and went off the track, falling into a ravine. Robert survived but was severely injured. While recovering in the hospital, Robert received an unexpected visit, Gregory. He entered the room unannounced, with that same cold smile David had described. Gregory sat by the bed and bluntly said, "You should have stopped while you could, Robert. Now, like David, you are a threat that needs to be eliminated." Robert tried to protest, but he was too weak. Gregory continued, explaining that Freemasonry had its own ways of dealing with those who rebelled. We did it with David, and now we'll do it with you. Don't worry, your death will be seen as a tragedy, but for us, it will just be a necessity." In the days that followed, Robert began to be medicated with increasingly large doses of sedatives, and his health conditions worsened. He desperately tried to contact his friends and ask for help, but his messages were intercepted, and no one seemed to believe his claims about Freemasonry. On the morning of his death, nurses found Robert hanged in the hospital bathroom. His death was declared a suicide, but those who knew David's story, his few remaining friends, knew that was not the truth. They knew Robert had discovered too much, and like David, he had paid the ultimate price. Robert's death was the final blow in the struggle against Freemasonry. Everyone who had tried to investigate what really happened to David Harrison was silenced one way or another. David's house was finally demolished, but the land continued to be avoided by everyone, considered cursed. The story of David Harrison, Robert Thompson, and now Robert's story, remains a dark warning. There are forces in this world that should not be challenged. Secrets that, once unearthed, bring with them terrible consequences. And those who dare to seek these truths may not face death as the worst fate, but rather the eternal torment of knowing they can never escape what they have discovered. If you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you have any supernatural experiences, don't keep them to yourself. Write your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the unexplainable, feed the collective curiosity, and perhaps together, we can unravel these mysteries that linger like mist between the world of the living and the dead. As the months passed since Rachel Morgan was found in a state of shock on the cursed land, the disappearance of Julia and Mark, her team members, was officially filed as an unsolved case. The small town of Boston continued its quiet routine, but fear and curiosity around David Harrison's land only grew. People spoke in whispers about what really happened that night, but no one dared to investigate further. While Rachel remained hospitalized, a new character entered the story. Alex Carter, a renowned investigative journalist from New York, known for exposing conspiracies and mysteries, learned about Rachel Morgan's case through an anonymous source. Alex had a history of investigating the occult and the unexplainable, and the story of the cursed land and Freemasonry deeply intrigued him. Determined to uncover the truth, Alex traveled to Boston. He believed that the disappearance of Julia and Mark, as well as Rachel's mental collapse, were linked to something much larger, something that could be related to the darkest secrets of Freemasonry. Upon arriving in town, he began to ask questions, but, like Rachel, he encountered silent resistance. No one wanted to talk about the land, and those who did warned him to give up while he still could. Alex, however, was not the type to be intimidated. He reached out to former colleagues of David Harrison and Robert Thompson, trying to gather as much information as possible. He discovered that both men had been members of a local Masonic lodge, known for its secret rituals and connections to influential figures in politics and business. This lodge, according to rumors, was known for performing invocation and sacrifice rituals, something few dared to mention publicly. Determined to move forward, Alex managed to secure special permission to visit Rachel in the psychiatric hospital. When he entered her room, he was shocked to see her, a once vibrant and determined woman now thin, with vacant eyes, staring at a wall. She seemed to be in another world, trapped in an endless cycle of horror. Alex tried to speak with her, but Rachel only muttered incomprehensible things about figures in the shadows and voices that won't be silent. However, there was a moment when she seemed to regain lucidity for a brief instant. She grabbed Alex's arm with surprising strength, and with eyes filled with dread, whispered, "Don't go there, Alex. They are waiting." They know you are coming." Despite the warning, Alex could not turn back. He felt he was close to uncovering something significant, something no one else had managed to expose. He left the hospital with a feeling of unease, but was more determined than ever to unravel the mystery. That same night, Alex decided to visit the land. He brought only a camera and a recorder, hoping to capture evidence that could corroborate the stories he had heard. When he arrived, he found the land covered in a thick mist that seemed to swallow everything around. The silence was almost absolute, broken only by the distant sound of branches breaking under his feet. Alex began to explore the land, recording his observations. He noticed that the soil seemed strangely disturbed, as if someone had recently dug there. The deeper he walked, the stronger the feeling of being watched became. At one point, his recorder picked up a low sound, a murmur almost imperceptible. He stopped, listening intently. The words were distorted, but he could make out a phrase: "Do not disturb what is buried." Suddenly, the camera lights began to flicker, and Alex felt a chill run down his spine. He turned sharply and saw a figure in the mist, a hooded silhouette, exactly as Rachel had described. The figure stood still, watching him, and Alex felt an overwhelming pressure on his mind, as if the mere presence of the figure was draining his energy. Trying to keep his composure, Alex slowly backed away, but the figure began to move towards him noiselessly. Panic took over him, and Alex began to run, trying to find the exit to the land. He heard footsteps behind him but dared not look back. When he finally reached the edge of the land, the figure had disappeared, but the fear persisted. Back at his hotel, Alex reviewed the recordings. The images were distorted, but the hooded figure was visible, as was the murmur he had captured. Now he knew he was dealing with something real, something that could not be easily explained. However, instead of giving up, Alex decided he needed more definitive answers. He began investigating the records of Freemasonry in town, trying to learn more about the Masonic lodge to which David and Robert belonged. It was then he found a name that repeatedly appeared: Arthur Caldwell, a veteran member of the lodge, known to be one of the most influential leaders of the fraternity. Alex arranged a meeting with Arthur, who agreed to meet him at a discreet cafe on the outskirts of town. Arthur was an elderly man, with a commanding presence and a gaze that seemed to penetrate the soul. When Alex began to ask questions about David Harrison, Robert Thompson, and Freemasonry, Arthur watched him in silence for a long time before responding. "You do not understand what you are dealing with, young man," Arthur finally said. Freemasonry is much more than a secret society. We deal with ancient forces, forces that have shaped the world since time immemorial. David and Robert, they strayed from the path, tried to expose secrets that cannot be revealed. And they paid the price for it. Alex pressed Arthur for more details, but the old Mason refused to say more. "There are things you should not know, Alex," he said, rising to leave. "Go back to New York, continue with your life. Forgetting what you have discovered is the only way you can survive." Despite Arthur's warning, Alex was more determined than ever to continue. He decided that the only way to fully understand what was happening was to return to the land one last time, this time more prepared and with the help of a renowned medium, who agreed to accompany him. The following night, Alex and the medium, Evelyn, returned to the land. Evelyn, who had participated in numerous paranormal investigations, had never felt an energy as heavy as what emanated from that place. She immediately knew they were dealing with something far more powerful than mere disturbed spirits. As they began a spiritual communication session, Evelyn was overtaken by an invisible force. Her eyes rolled back and she began to speak in a voice that was not her own. The message was clear: the secrets buried here must not be revealed. Those who challenge what is hidden only find death. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble. The medium fainted, and Alex, in a state of panic, tried to drag her out of the land. But what happened next was a true nightmare. The ground opened up like a hungry mouth, and from it, shadows emerged, hooded figures that silently advanced towards Alex. He tried to escape, but something was pulling him to the ground, as if the very hands of the land were trying to drag him down. At the last moment, when all seemed lost, Alex saw a bright light, a figure of a man, dressed in white, who emanated a calming energy. The figure extended his hand, and Alex felt enveloped in a sensation of peace, being pulled back to the surface. When Alex awoke, he was lying on the edge of the land, with the medium beside him, still unconscious. The figure of light had disappeared, and everything was silent again. He managed to drag Evelyn to the car and drove away, vowing never to return. Alex left Boston that same night, taking the recordings and the few answers he had managed to obtain. He published his story, but what followed was a strange phenomenon. The evidence he presented was discredited, and he was labeled a charlatan and sensationalist. The recordings mysteriously began to deteriorate, and soon all the videos were corrupted as if they had never existed. Without a reputation and fearing for his life, Alex abandoned his career as a journalist and moved to a small town in the countryside, trying to escape the forces he felt were still watching him. But the nightmares never ceased, and he knew that, despite having survived, he would never be truly safe. The land, meanwhile, continued to be avoided, and the city of Boston tried once again to forget it. But what Alex and those before him had discovered remains buried in the shadows, a dark truth about Freemasonry, about ancient rituals and sacrifices still made in the name of a power that no one truly understands. And so, the story of David Harrison, Robert Thompson, Rachel Morgan, and Alex Carter remains as a dark warning. There are forces in this world that should not be challenged. Secrets that, once revealed, bring with them terrible consequences. And for those who dare to seek these truths, death may not be the worst fate, but rather the eternal torment of knowing they can never escape what they have discovered. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like to support us. And more importantly, if you have any supernatural experiences, don't keep them to yourself. Write your story in the comments below. Share your encounter with the unexplainable, fuel the collective curiosity, and who knows, perhaps together we can unravel these mysteries that linger like mist between the world of the living and the dead.